$180 billion, that specific figure is absolutely not a typographical error, nor does it represent some catchy political campaign slogan. Rather, it signifies the exact volume of public funds that completely vanished from the state of California during the administrative tenure of one specific leader. This massive financial disappearance was thoroughly uncovered by official financial audits, bravely exposed by internal whistleblowers, and rigorously investigated by federal law enforcement agencies. Then, on a particular Tuesday evening located inside the prestigious National Press Club in Washington, D.C., that very same political leader sat directly across a table from Donald Trump. His primary objective was to articulate exactly why he firmly believed he was fully entitled to become the next elected president of the United States of America. He absolutely should never have chosen to sit down in that chair. Throughout my career, I have dedicated a massive amount of time to carefully observing elected officials as they confidently stride into various rooms that they mistakenly assume they completely dominate. I have personally watched numerous state governors dispense casual handshakes to everyday citizens as though they were bestowing a magnificent favor upon them. Similarly, I have observed powerful senators relentlessly practice their expressions of heartfelt sincerity until their calculated rehearsals became entirely imperceptible to the naked eye. However, despite all of those past experiences, I have never, in my entire life, witnessed any human being walk into a professional environment projecting the immense, absolute self-certainty that Gavin Newsom exhibited as he entered that specific venue on that particular night. His posture was perfectly straight, his signature smile was firmly locked into its designated position, and he essentially possessed the distinct walk of an ambitious man who had already meticulously drafted his future presidential inauguration speech inside his own mind. Conversely, I have absolutely never witnessed any individual depart from a room in the exact manner that he eventually walked out. He left completely silenced, his head hanging down in undeniable defeat, with that trademark smile still technically plastered across his face, yet utterly drained of every single element of confidence that had previously made it function so effectively. You must fundamentally comprehend his specific motivation for being present in that room. This was by no means a mandatory summons, and Newsom was certainly not dragged to Washington against his will. He deeply and intensely desired this encounter, having systematically engineered his political trajectory toward this exact moment for the past 2 years. He was successfully capturing 24% of the Democratic base for the 2028 presidential nomination, significantly outpacing all other potential candidates. He was actively publishing an autobiography titled Young Man in a Hurry and hosting a digital podcast where he engaged in discussions with conservative voices such as Steve Bannon, Ben Shapiro, and Charlie Kirk. His goal was to explicitly demonstrate his ability to debate absolutely anyone, disagree with elegant grace, and still emerge appearing as the most highly intelligent individual seated at the table. When the formal invitation arrived from Trump, Newsom envisioned precisely what he most wanted to see: a grand national debate stage, a preliminary audition for the 2028 election cycle, and a prime opportunity to sit beside the former president to explicitly show 70 million television viewers that he rightfully belonged in that ultimate chair of power. He remained completely and blissfully unaware of the devastating contents hidden inside the blue folder. Newsom commenced his opening pitch in the exact manner he always utilizes, exceptionally fast, highly polished, and featuring the specific kind of rhetorical delivery that routinely secures victories in Californian state primaries and garners standing ovations at elite TED conferences on the very same afternoon. He confidently stated to the former president that he had not arrived there to exchange petty political insults, but rather because the American public fundamentally deserved to witness two prominent leaders engaging in a mature, adult conversation regarding the future destiny of the country. He proudly boasted the following statistics. California possesses a massive gross domestic product of $3.6 trillion. It currently ranks as the 5th largest economy on Earth. The state's economy is structurally larger than both India and the United Kingdom. California spearheads the entire nation in clean energy development, technological advancement, agricultural shipping exports, and creative innovation. While other geographic regions were reducing their budgets, California was actively building and expanding, He allowed that grandiose statement to linger in the air before deliberately pressing forward. He mentioned that his spouse expertly manages a nonprofit organization completely dedicated to promoting gender equity within the media landscape, highlighting their mutual belief in putting core values into definitive action, rather than merely talking about them endlessly. Looking directly and intensely at Trump, Newsom boldly declared that, unlike certain individuals present in that very room, he had maintained absolute and continuous financial transparency since his absolute first day in public office. He noted that he voluntarily disclosed his personal tax returns when campaigning for the governorship and successfully enacted binding legislation requiring all future presidential candidates to do the exact same thing, specifically framing transparency not as an optional choice, but as an absolute moral duty. It was an exceptionally well-crafted line of argumentation, incredibly practiced, flawlessly smooth, and remarkably presidential if one simply refrained from analyzing the underlying substance too carefully. If you were casually sitting at home watching this broadcast, you might have easily felt something deeply familiar. That glossy, practiced assertiveness, the immaculately styled hair that absolutely never moves out of place, and the practiced grin that silently demands your absolute trust. Audiences have witnessed this exact same routine from a dozen different political figures across a dozen different election cycles, and they rarely bought into the illusion back then, either. Throughout this entire exhaustive pitch, Trump had not uttered a single solitary word, not one single word. He sat directly across from Newsom, resting his folded hands peacefully over a closed blue folder. He deliberately refrained from interrupting. He did not roll his eyes in frustration, and he exhibited absolutely none of the aggressive behaviors that Newsom had dedicated 2 full weeks to preparing against. I have witnessed Trump in a state of visible anger. I have seen him expertly work a rally crowd until 10,000 people completely forgot they had been standing on their feet for 3 solid hours. I have watched him effortlessly turn a simple nickname into a career-ending political weapon. Yet, I had never before observed him this remarkably patient, entirely motionless, and totally serene, and that highly unusual demeanor absolutely should have served as a massive, blaring warning signal. When the California governor finally concluded his remarks, Trump paused for 3 completely silent, agonizing seconds in a room packed with 200 recording cameras. When he finally chose to speak, there was no loud shouting, no derogatory moniker, and no direct insult offered. He simply adopted the calm, steady tone of an executive interviewing a candidate for a position they were absolutely guaranteed to lose. Trump complimented the presentation as being really beautiful, stating that if he were currently recruiting a speaker for a TED Talk, the governor would secure the job instantly. However, he noted that Newsom was not applying for that specific role. Tapping the blue folder with a single finger, Trump noted that the governor was applying for the presidency of the United States. He opened the file and rationally suggested they proceed exactly as any reasonable employer would when presented with a beautiful resume and a beautiful smile, by meticulously checking the underlying numbers. That precise instant marked the realization that this was absolutely not a traditional debate. Debates generally feature 2 equal participants and a superficially neutral moderator who pretends to be fair. This, however, was an executive job interview, and Gavin Newsom, who had confidently marched in anticipating a traditional sparring partner, suddenly found himself uncomfortably seated on the wrong side of the desk. Trump flipped to the initial page of the document. Running his finger steadily down the page, Trump began by noting the governor's heavily touted experience in managing a tremendously large state budget. California levies the absolute highest income tax rate in the entire country at 13.3%. The state forces its citizens to pay the highest gasoline tax nationwide. California maintains the highest sales tax across most consumer categories. The government charges the people of California significantly more than any other state charges its own respective residents. Glancing up from the paper, Trump pointedly asked if it was correct that, despite all this massive revenue, the governor still absolutely could not balance the financial books. Newsom quickly leaned forward, entering into familiar rhetorical terrain that he knew well. He argued defensively that every major state in America is currently navigating complex post-pandemic fiscal adjustments. He aggressively defended California's current budget deficit as being a completely manageable fraction of their massive overall GDP. He asserted that his administration purposefully chose to invest heavily in people, educational systems, medical health care, and public infrastructure, noting that such endeavors inherently cost money. Newsom proudly claimed that unlike other regions that ruthlessly slashed public services merely to balance a spreadsheet, his state deliberately elected to invest in the long-term future. It was certainly not a bad answer overall. If you heard it delivered at a standard press conference, you would likely nod in agreement. If you read it printed in a newspaper column, it would sound highly responsible and measured. Newsom even strategically deployed the specific word invest 3 separate times, which is the exact tactic politicians utilize when they desperately want the public to forget the word spend. Trump, however, did not nod his head even a fraction of an inch. He directly questioned the governor's characterization of $20 billion as a mere fraction of a $3.6 trillion economy. Transitioning smoothly, Trump then asked another extremely pointed question. Exactly how many people completely left your state last year? Newsom visibly hesitated, but not for long, perhaps merely half a second. However, in a room completely full of highly focused cameras, half a second of hesitation is more than enough to generate a major headline. He attempted to wave the inquiry off, stating that complex population shifts routinely reflect shifting housing costs, remote work trends, and evolving climate preferences. Trump delivered the precise statistic with deliberate, heavy anticipation, 1.7 million. He stated it exactly the way someone says a number they have been eagerly waiting to say aloud. He emphasized that 1.7 million individuals packed up a moving truck and permanently left California, and they did so not because of the local weather patterns, and certainly not because of remote work opportunities, but specifically because of Gavin Newsom's leadership. Trump unequivocally asserted that these former residents cast a negative vote against the governor's budget using their feet, and their vote was a resounding no. Here is exactly what I want you to truly hear from this exchange. He actively called $20 billion a mere fraction, and you likely caught that specific spin. You caught it because you have been watching smooth politicians repackage their massive failures as bold ambition for as long as you have been alive. And those 1.7 million people who departed, some of them are quite literally your own children. Some of them are your former neighbors, and some of them are the lovely family that used to live exactly 3 houses down the street, until one day the house was suddenly empty and you never even got a proper chance to say a final goodbye. Trump efficiently turned the page to the next major item, crisis management. He read the formal heading aloud, noting that Newsom claimed to have successfully managed the homelessness crisis in California, and suggested they discuss that specific topic. Delivering the metrics with the cold, emotionless precision of an accountant reading numbers, Trump stripped away all the drama and performance, presenting just the raw data. $37 billion is the exact amount California expended on the homelessness crisis over the last several years. This massive sum was distributed across 9 distinct government agencies. The funding fueled 41 completely different state programs. Looking directly at Newsom, Trump revealed the catastrophic ultimate result. Homelessness in California dramatically increased by an astonishing 53% since the year 2013, currently totaling 181,000 individuals. He noted that a staggering 30% of every single unhoused person in the entire United States now resides within Newsom's state. Quoting the state's own official auditor directly, Trump highlighted the devastating conclusion that the state fundamentally lacks reliable, actionable data to evaluate whether any of these expensive programs are actually effective. Setting the document down flat, Trump calculated that the state effectively spent $42,000 annually per unhoused individual. He noted that this sheer amount of money could have easily purchased every single one of those people a pre-owned vehicle and fully covered a year of apartment rent in Reno. Instead of solving the issue, the administration merely funded a continuous revolving door. A massive 44% of the individuals the state claimed to help ended up right back on the street, while a pathetic 13% actually managed to find permanent housing. Trump ruthlessly pointed out that if any private business entity operated with a dismal 13% success rate, it would be permanently shut down immediately. Yet, the governor did not shut anything down. He simply added even more program. Newsom quickly straightened his posture, instantly reverting to the exact same script that every Californian official keeps permanently stored in their back pocket. He argued that homelessness is fundamentally a national crisis, not merely a California crisis, and that every major city in the country is currently dealing with the exact same structural issues. He blamed massive federal underinvestment in critical areas such as mental health, affordable housing, and addiction services, insisting that one cannot logically lay a national emergency at the feet of one single state governor. It certainly sounds quite reasonable until you critically look at one specific, damning number. Trump immediately seized on the word national, demanding a clear explanation for why California, which holds exactly 12% of the country's total population, somehow shelters a massive 30% of the nation's homeless individuals. Trump unequivocally stated that if this is truly a national crisis, the state should not possess 2.5 times its logical share. He bluntly concluded that California is not merely part of the problem, the state is the actual problem itself. As Newsom desperately attempted to interject with convoluted explanations regarding per capita investments and complex cost of living adjustments, Trump cut through the interruption like it simply was not there. He aggressively demanded a very simple answer regarding the exact whereabouts of the $37 billion. He clarified he did not want to know where it was allocated or where it was budgeted, but precisely where it is right now in reality. He challenged the governor to produce just one single audit that successfully tracks the money from his administrative desk directly to a human being who is no longer forced to sleep on a concrete sidewalk. 3 full seconds of absolute silence followed that challenge. Trump noted that the silence was absolutely not an answer, nor was it even a valid attempt at an answer. He validated the deep frustrations of everyday citizens, noting you have been saying this exact same thing for years while sitting at your kitchen table to your kids who quickly changed the subject and to your neighbors who politely nodded and then went and voted the exact same way they always vote. $37 billion was spent, and the structural problem got worse, not just a little worse, but exactly 53% worse. You were absolutely not wrong. You were never wrong, and tonight someone was finally saying it out loud with the television cameras continuously rolling. Yet, the massive homelessness expenditure was merely one single line on the governor's resume. Trump casually alluded to the missing $180 billion in passing, mentioning it the exact way you mention a crucial number you fully plan to return to later in the conversation. He stated they would get to the $180 billion soon enough, but for now, they would keep going. The governor's smile grew noticeably thinner, not entirely gone just yet, but substantially thinner, highly resembling a dangerous crack in a car windshield that has not yet completely reached the absolute edge. If you are currently watching this broadcast and you already intuitively know exactly where it is heading, or if you actively moved out of California, or if your children moved out, or if you simply remember exactly what that wonderful state used to be before this particular man got his hands on it, definitely share this with them. Because Trump is absolutely not done. He is not even close to being done. Trump systematically turned to the next designated section of the blue folder, reading the heading out loud, Infrastructure Development. He almost smiled in anticipation. He recounted the historical fact that in 2008, the voting public of California officially approved a massive bond measure meant to construct a high-speed rail system connecting Los Angeles directly to San Francisco. The voters were explicitly told that the project would cost exactly $33 billion and that it would be entirely finished by the year 2020. It was heavily marketed as being fast, clean, modern, and the absolute future of transportation. That is precisely what was on the official ballot. And that is exactly what the public voted for. Placing his hand totally flat on the folder, Trump strongly emphasized the reality that it is now the year 2026, and there is absolutely no train and absolutely no track. Not one single mile, not one single foot, and not one single inch of rail has actually been laid down. A staggering $18 billion has already been spent, and the only tangible thing standing in the Central Valley today is a sad row of concrete pillars sitting in the middle of an empty field. There is absolutely no rail placed on top of them, there are no stations, and there are certainly no passengers. There is nothing but concrete, dirt, and $18 billion worth of nothing. Looking directly at Newsom, Trump highlighted that the original financial estimate was $33 billion, while the current projected estimate is somewhere astronomically between $128 billion and $231 billion, strictly depending on which specific page of their own Transportation Authority's report you happen to read. He noted this represents an absolutely massive 700% cost increase for a physical product that does not actually exist. He challenged the governor to name just one single mile of track. Newsom visibly shifted in his chair, defensively arguing that the authority has actually made significant tangible progress in right-of-way land acquisition, complex environmental reviews, and structural design certification. He grandly called it a generational infrastructure project that fundamentally requires immense long-term vision and sustained financial commitment. Trump immediately pressed back, sharply mocking right-of-way acquisition as an incredibly expensive way of simply admitting that you bought the empty land and completely forgot to build the actual train. A distinct sound actively moved through the room. It was not exactly laughter, but rather something significantly closer to a painful wince. Trump relentlessly reminded Newsom that he told the voters the project would be ready in 2020, yet it is currently 2026, and his own internal report states, "The very first segment will absolutely not be ready until 2033, at the absolute earliest." Furthermore, Trump pointed out that this initial segment only connects Merced to Bakersfield, which is a trip that absolutely nobody is making, entirely abandoning the highly promised Los Angeles to San Francisco route. Trump sardonically conceded it was indeed a generational project, noting that the voters' grandchildren will still be aggressively paying for it, and they still will absolutely not have a functioning train. With $18 billion entirely spent and no track laid, Trump stated he did not need to explain how that feels to the public. You already know exactly how it feels because you have helplessly watched your state gas taxes go up consistently, you have watched your local roads get worse, and you have watched your vital bridges get older. And now you suddenly find out that the state government absolutely cannot build a simple train between two cities despite spending far more money than most sovereign countries spend on their entire national military. You know exactly how that betrayal feels. At this exact juncture, Newsom finally executed the specific maneuver I had been completely expecting him to deploy since the very first question was asked. He stopped defensively protecting his own record, and he aggressively went on the attack. His voice noticeably changed in tone, and the smooth TED Talk polish was instantly gone. This was the aggressive Newsom who previously debated Ron DeSantis on Fox News and confidently walked away genuinely thinking he had won the encounter. He fiercely demanded they talk about resumes, heavily focusing on Trump's. Newsom aggressively itemized the attacks. 34 felony convictions, that is your resume. People tragically died in that building on January the 6th, that is your resume. You lost the national popular vote twice. 63% of Americans explicitly said they would never vote for you again. Your various casinos went completely bankrupt. Your namesake university was exposed as a fraud. Your own personal charity was completely shut down by the state of New York for what they legally termed a shocking pattern of illegality. He concluded by stating Trump could not possibly win California even with the help of a forklift, losing by 5 million votes on 2 separate occasions. He aggressively leaned into the microphone, declaring that he refused to pretend to be intimidated by the interview. It was absolutely not a weak attack. It was far from it. Every single word Newsom said during that outburst was completely factually accurate. The felony convictions were real, the casino bankruptcies were real, and the events of January the 6th were real. For approximately 40 seconds, the momentum in the room genuinely shifted. Newsom's political team in the gallery was proudly standing up, the California delegation was furiously nodding in agreement, and for one highly real, he absolutely should not have looked quite so confident, because what occurred next was something Newsom had never once prepared for, not in his extensive debate prep, not on his political podcast, and not in the mirror where he diligently practiced looking deeply presidential. I have extensively covered politics for a very long time, and I have definitely seen people win arguments but completely lose their careers in the exact same sentence. What Trump said next is something I have personally watched 3 times, and I still absolutely cannot believe he said it out loud. Trump did not aggressively fire back in anger. That was the very first major surprise. He calmly sat with Newsom's massive attack, simply hanging in the air, much the way thick smoke hangs long after a heavy cannon goes off. Then he simply nodded his head and said, "Fair enough, Governor. Fair enough." Trump openly admitted the casino failures, calling them not his best idea, and even acknowledged past arrogant remarks about telling a crowd he was the most humble person in the room, admitting that did not go over great. The room laughed, and the immense tension cracked just enough. But then Trump delivered the absolute defining difference between them. He stated that he had been relentlessly investigated, officially indicted, criminally convicted, and had his home, his private office, and even the boxes in his bathroom heavily raided by law enforcement, yet he was still comfortably sitting exactly where he was. He explained the reason why. Because the American people already thoroughly know absolutely every single page of his record, every controversial chapter, every bankrupt casino, and every bad decision. There are absolutely no surprises left to uncover. His resume has been exhaustively read by ambitious prosecutors, by aggressive journalists, and by 200 million American voters. Leaning aggressively forward, Trump powerfully declared that Newsom's resume is the singular one that absolutely nobody has read yet, and they were most certainly not finished reading it tonight. Trump smoothly turned to a brand new section in the folder. The specific heading was simple: references. He noted that every good professional resume requires solid references, people who can firmly vouch for your character, your decision-making judgment, and the specific kind of people you actively choose to surround yourself with. He suggested they check the governor's references. He clearly read the very first name, Dana Williamson, your powerful chief of staff. Newsom's posture noticeably and immediately changed. It was a very small physical reaction, the kind of subtle shift you would easily miss if you were simply watching on a mobile phone, but in that specific room, I saw it clearly. Trump intensely demanded to know exactly where Dana Williamson is right now. When Newsom attempted to desperately distance his administration by stating her personal conduct was entirely separate from the administration's official work, Trump ruthlessly interrupted him. Trump revealed exactly where she is. She is currently awaiting formal sentencing in a federal court. He detailed her shocking guilty pleas submitted just 8 weeks prior on May 14th of that year. Conspiracy to heavily commit bank fraud and wire fraud, filing a deliberately false tax return, making completely false statements directly to federal investigators. She faced 4 major charges and was found guilty on all 4. Trump forcefully closed his hand entirely around the page, emphasizing that this individual was absolutely not some minor junior aide or a naive intern who got in way over her head. This was his absolute chief of staff. She actively ran the governor's office, she meticulously managed his daily schedule, and she possessed direct access to every single sensitive document, every major executive decision, and every single dollar that moved through the highest office in the state, and she officially pleaded guilty to massive fraud. Trump heavily criticized the media headlines that completely failed to tell the public the truth, noting they misleadingly called Williamson a former aide or a political consultant, actively burying her actual immense title. She was definitely not a consultant. She was the exact person physically standing directly next to the governor whenever he signed major bills into law, the person who unilaterally decided who received a meeting and who absolutely did not, and the most powerful person in the room when the biggest decisions were finalized. And she pleaded guilty to actively stealing money and blatantly lying to the FBI about her crime. Trump commanded the audience to deeply think about that horrifying reality for a moment. California completely lost $180 billion to massive unemployment fraud, medical fraud, and hospice fraud. A vital in-home care program that was genuinely supposed to help struggling families horribly mutated into a $30 billion a year shadow welfare system that organized criminals aggressively exploited. While the state shockingly employed exactly 2 people to check for fraud across the entire massive system, the specific person running the governor's office, the person closest to all of the power, was actively committing fraud herself. Trump simply let the heavy silence do the necessary work, asking if he should call the next reference on the list. The governor's smile was technically still there, much the way a physical clock is still technically a clock long after the internal hands completely stop moving. The outward shape remains, but the actual function absolutely does not. If you know someone who still religiously watches CNN and genuinely sees a rising political star when they see Gavin Newsom's face, or if you know someone who blindly reads the polls and thinks this specific man should run the entire country, send them this video immediately. Because what comes next is absolutely not about politics anymore. It is entirely about core character. And the very next reference on his detailed list was not a staff employee, it was his direct family. Trump turned to the next page in the blue folder and did something he had not done all night long. He directly quoted Newsom's own words back to him. He noted the governor previously boasted that his wife successfully runs a nonprofit completely dedicated to gender equity. Trump stated he wanted to talk about the Representation Project. Newsom's jaw visibly tightened, a very small physical tell, the specific kind of thing you quickly learn to spot when you have watched enough seasoned politicians realize the conversation just aggressively turned a dangerous corner they absolutely cannot see around. Trump continued reading directly from what heavily appeared to be photocopied IRS tax filing. He revealed the nonprofit actively receives between $1 million and $1.7 million every single year in various grants and donations. His wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, serves as the chief operating officer. and her personal film production company is officially called Girls Club Entertainment. Turning a page, Trump revealed that since 2012, this specific nonprofit has successfully paid his wife and her private company a massive combined total of $3.7 million. This equates to approximately $300,000 per year, essentially taken directly from a charity that only takes in $1 million a year, meaning an absolutely staggering 30% overhead cost is spent on just one single salary. Looking straight up from the filings, Trump revealed where the situation gets truly interesting. The Sacramento Bee conducted a major investigation into the specific donors to the wife's charity. They successfully found that more than a dozen of the absolute largest financial donors are major, massive corporations that actively and regularly lobby the state of California for highly lucrative policy concessions, including massive energy companies, enormous tech companies, and massive healthcare conglomerates. These corporations generously donate to the wife's nonprofit, and then they immediately sit down directly with Newsom's administration to heavily discuss vital regulations that directly affect their corporate bottom line. Furthermore, the Bee found one more incredibly damning thing. The wife's charity revenue massively spiked every single time Newsom's political career advanced. When he became lieutenant governor, the donations instantly went up. When he became full governor, they dramatically went up again. And the absolute moment the newspaper started asking difficult questions about the donor list, the charity completely stopped publishing it, and the donor page on the website completely disappeared. Setting the IRS documents down, Trump summarized the blatantly corrupt arrangement. Massive companies that desperately want favors from the state eagerly donate to the wife's charity. The wife's charity then generously pays the wife $300,000 a year, and the exact companies that donated successfully receive highly favorable political treatment directly from the administration. Trump coolly remarked that in the normal private sector, there is a very specific word for that type of arrangement, but he would gracefully let the Department of Justice ultimately pick the one they highly prefer. Cornered, Newsom straightened his posture and desperately reached for the absolute last political tool he had remaining, the one specific tool that had absolutely always worked perfectly in California, and the one tool that CNN and MSNBC had absolutely never once questioned. He aggressively claimed his wife was being unfairly targeted by a highly politically motivated federal investigation. He insisted this was the Trump Department of Justice actively doing exactly what it was sinisterly designed to do, aggressively going after political opponents and unfairly going after their innocent families. He claimed this had absolutely nothing to do with a charity and everything to do with the fact that he was the absolute leading Democratic candidate for 2028, and the opposing administration simply could not tolerate that reality. It was the classic play the victim card, the exact one that had successfully saved 100 different politicians before him. And in California, standing in front of a highly friendly press corps, it absolutely might have worked. Trump did not raise his voice in the slightest. He calmly noted the devastating fact that the formal investigation officially started under President Biden, absolutely not under him. It was heavily initiated by nonpartisan career prosecutors located in the United States Attorney's Office in Sacramento, and it explicitly began precisely because of formal whistleblower complaints generated from people located entirely inside Newsom's very own system. His completely own employees actively saw exactly what was happening, and they reported it directly to federal law enforcement. His own people ultimately reported him. Newsom completely failed to respond. Reaching for one more vital page, Trump declared he found something else incredibly interesting. He targeted Newsom's boastful earlier quote regarding absolute financial transparency. He reminded the governor of his exact words spoken merely 14 minutes ago, that he promised to release his tax returns, signed a law demanding it, and firmly called transparency an absolute moral duty. Holding up the page, Trump completely exposed the stunning reality of what Newsom actually did. In 2017, when he announced his major campaign for governor, he explicitly promised voters he would absolutely be the first California governor to openly release his private tax returns every single year without fail. In 2019, he aggressively went further and officially signed an actual, legally binding law on the books of the state of California strictly requiring any presidential candidate to entirely release their 5 most recent tax returns just to appear on the state ballot. He passionately signed that law because, as he claimed, it was a profound moral duty, and absolutely everybody fundamentally knew that specific law was aimed completely at Donald Trump. He heavily paused before delivering the final blow. The governor's absolute last publicly released tax return was for the tax year 2020, formally filed in 2022, which was exactly 4 full years ago. That represents exactly 4 complete years of absolute total silence from the exact man who loudly called transparency a moral duty. In 2021, there was absolutely nothing. In 2022, nothing. In 2023, nothing. In 2024, nothing. And in 2025, nothing. During that exact same period of total silence, Newsom successfully purchased a massive $9 million luxury home located in Marin County. The everyday people of California absolutely do not know exactly where that massive amount of money came from because he completely stopped telling them. And when a legitimate reporter actively asked him about this very discrepancy just 9 days ago at a formal press conference in his own home state, he absolutely did not answer the question. He aggressively snapped at her, he wildly blamed Trump, and he quickly walked off the stage. Trump cleanly summarized the complete structural failure. He signed a restrictive law requiring candidates to release tax returns. He completely stopped releasing his own. He called transparency a vital moral duty. He completely went totally dark for 4 long years, and when someone simply asked why, he fled the room. The press room was completely quiet, the specific kind of deep quiet where you can vividly hear the hum of the air conditioning unit and the sharp click of a camera shutter located 2 rows back. I want you to fundamentally understand exactly what just happened, because it happened extremely fast, and it happened totally clean, and if you merely blinked, you absolutely might have missed exactly how total the destruction actually was. The charming TED Talk polish that previously opened every appearance completely stopped working in the very first round when Trump actively asked a question that strictly required a hard number instead of a long speech. The smooth spin designed to reframe deficits as investments and homelessness as a national crisis completely died the exact moment Trump aggressively asked for 1 single mile of track and received nothing but total silence. The aggressive attacks completely failed when Trump calmly absorbed every single punch, admitted every single flaw, and ruthlessly turned the page to references. The victimhood narrative was entirely shattered by 1 single word: whistleblower. 20 long years of meticulously building the absolute perfect political exterior were completely dismantled in exactly 20 minutes by a man holding a simple blue folder. Gavin Newsom uncomfortably sat in his chair at the National Press Club and, for the absolute very first time in his entire 15 years of public political life, he absolutely did not have a single answer. He actively started to speak, stating the reality is, and then he abruptly stopped and looked completely down at the table, allowing the room to fully watch a man who had entirely never been without words finally discover exactly what it genuinely felt like to absolutely have none at all. And then Trump clearly said the absolute last thing Gavin Newsom would ever hear as a viable presidential candidate. Trump completely closed the blue folder. He absolutely did not raise his voice, he did not smile, and he totally ceased to perform. He simply spoke the exact way you speak when you are directly telling someone something they absolutely already know deep down but have entirely not yet heard out loud. You broke California and you want a promotion. Those 7 exact words landed perfectly, echoing the exact way a heavy stone lands at the absolute dark bottom of a deep well. You clearly hear the drop. And then you hear absolutely nothing else. Newsom did not respond at all. Trump patiently waited for 3 seconds. Then 5 seconds. The television cameras were continuously running, but the entire room had completely stopped moving. Trump calmly told him to take his time, but there was nothing. The smile was technically still there, maintaining its shape, but the internal light was completely turned off. Newsom attempted to speak about the people of California, but entirely failed to finish the sentence, unable to look anywhere but completely down at his own hands. Trump actively turned away from Newsom and spoke directly to the cameras. He deliberately spoke for every single person who fundamentally knew that polished smile was entirely empty. He passionately spoke for everyday families who absolutely could not properly bury their own mothers during the strict lockdown rules, while Newsom actively ate $350 expensive dinners with corporate lobbyists at the French Laundry. He powerfully spoke for small business owners who tragically lost their restaurants and gyms, while connected insiders easily received contracts, and his wife received massive donations. He spoke for struggling retirees whose $180 billion in tax dollars were completely stolen by criminals. He spoke for everyday children completely locked out of public schools, while the governor's absolute own kids attended private school every single day of that year. He spoke for every person forced to completely pack a truck and entirely leave their native state because he made it totally impossible to physically stay. Placing his hand entirely flat on the closed blue folder, Trump powerfully asked if he now wanted to do to 50 states exactly what he had completely done to one. He then declared, "Application denied." The room was totally too stunned for immediate, loud applause. I actively grew up watching smooth politicians promise things they entirely never intended to actually deliver, exactly like my hard-working father who worked 40 years and cynically believed they entirely think the public is stupid. He tragically died, believing absolutely no one would ever truly stand in a room and finally expose the entirely empty suit. Newsom is absolutely not unique. He is exactly the distinct type of highly polished candidate who continuously delivers nothing, but always ends up on magazine covers heavily touted as the future of the party. What genuinely made this specific Tuesday entirely different was that someone finally and completely called it out, and the man completely across the table absolutely could not answer. The folder, the numbers, the IRS filings, the guilty pleas, and the whistleblowers were all entirely and overwhelmingly real. $37 billion completely wasted on homelessness only made the entire problem significantly worse. A staggering $180 billion was entirely lost to massive fraud. An expensive train to nowhere absurdly cost $231 billion without a single solitary mile of actual track. A questionable charity was heavily funded by highly regulated companies, and a massive $9 million house entirely remains unexplained. These are absolute, fully documented facts. The taxpayers, the veterans, and the grandparents absolutely deserve a real answer, and they entirely did not get one because absolutely none exists. Ultimately, the future of this entire country fundamentally depends on whether we continuously keep hiring people strictly based on a polished resume, or if we finally start actually checking the true references and opening the blue folder.